Morning. The Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife will come to order. We're meeting today to discuss 4 bills that span sea turtle rescue to Western water climate change resiliency. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearing are limited to the chairman and the ranking member or their designees. This allows us to hear from our witnesses sooner and helps members keep their schedule. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all members' opening statements be made part of the record if they're submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. And hearing no objection, that is so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. As described in the hearing notice, any statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Members physically present should provide a hard copy for staff to distribute by email. Please note that members are responsible for their own microphones, so as with our fully in-person meetings, members will be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform staff right away so we can get that resolved. I'm now going to recognize myself for 5 minutes to make an opening statement. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. For these 4 bills, we are focused today on protecting our nation's wildlife and improving its water resources. First bill we'll discuss is Representative DeFazio's H.R. 4951, Canyons Law. This legislation prohibits the use of M44 devices, also known as cyanide bombs, on public lands, and it calls for their removal. These devices are a threat to people, pets, and wildlife. The bill is named after Canyon, a teenager from Idaho who accidentally triggered one of these M44s behind his house while playing with his family dog, Casey. Canyon was seriously injured by the resulting cloud of sodium cyanide and helplessly witnessed his dog perish at his feet. His dad, Mark, is here to testify at the hearing, and we appreciate that. M44s are not only unsafe, but they also have been proven ineffective as wildlife management tools. Their indiscriminate nature results in the death of non-target species, and they do little to shrink the target species population size. In fact, scientists have found that coyote populations respond to this sort of wildlife management by having more pups more often. Several states have either partially or fully banned these devices, and this bill would extend that ban to all federal public lands. The next bill on our agenda is Representative Keating's H.R. 7918, the Sea Turtle Rescue Assistance Act. It establishes the Sea Turtle Rescue Assistance Grant Program, improves our ability to save and rehabilitate stranded sea turtles, all of which are listed as threatened or endangered under the Endangered Species Act. These valuable animals are often found stranded on beaches, grappling with plastic waste, entangled in fishing gear, and stunned by the cold. Through this program, grants will aid the recovery, care, and treatment of stranded sea turtles. They'll also help scientists collect and share data from stranding incidents so that we can better understand the causes of such events and how to prevent them. Importantly, funding will be available to cover operational costs for facilities that care for stranded turtles. A lack of reliable funding has forced these facilities to use aquarium ticket sales to support rescue and rehabilitation efforts. Unsurprisingly, the COVID-19 pandemic put a major dent in those ticket sales, and so those funds are running out. Next, we'll discuss Representative Walberg's bill, H.R. 7975, the Great Lakes Restoration Semi-Postal Stamp Act. It creates a semi-postal stamp, the profits of which will go to a multi-agency effort to restore and protect the Great Lakes Basin and its unique ecosystem. The Great Lakes are subject to several threats, including but not limited to industrial pollution, invasive species, and habitat destruction. These are all, of course, made worse by the climate crisis. Finally, we'll discuss Representative Porter's bill, H.R. 8090, which reauthorizes funding for the Bureau of Reclamation's Basin Studies program. The Secure Water Act of 2011 directed Secretary of Interior to assess and address the effects of climate change on water resources in major western river basins, a directive that is implemented through the Reclamation's Basin Studies program. This program is particularly relevant today, as over 75% of the western U.S. grapples with the effects of drought, again made worse by climate change. Climate scientists are telling us to expect hotter, drier conditions and even less available water in upcoming years. Reclamation's Basin Study Program brings federal technical experts together with state, tribal, and local water managers to comprehensively assess water supply and demand imbalances at the basin level, including the anticipated impacts of climate change on water resources. And it helps them identify strategies to address those imbalances. Since completing 17 basin studies and with 10 more underway, Reclamation has proven the value of this basin-level examination of water availability and water need in the context of our changing climate. So Representative Porter's bill would allow this good work to continue by reauthorizing the program for 10 years. I look forward to hearing from our invited witnesses about these bills on the agenda today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ranking Member Benz for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subcommittee meets today to hear testimony on 4 bills. H.R. 8090 by Ms. Porter of California would extend the authorization of the Bureau of Reclamation's Climate Change and Water Program for another 10 fiscal years until 2033. This program provides the authority for basin studies in the western United States and requires a report to Congress every 5 years on how climate change is impacting water supplies, hydropower, and other things important to society. While the Department of the Interior has submitted written testimony on this bill, the agency will not be here to answer questions on how they plan to change the program compared to the last administration and what their vision of this 10-year program may be. The absence of a federal panel to discuss legislative items that impact their agencies is unfortunately a reoccurring theme in this subcommittee. We deserve to have a robust discussion with these agencies and hope that our next hearing will include a federal panel. H.R. 4951 by Mr. DeFazio from Oregon would ban the use of M44 devices on federal lands. I'm familiar with this concept since in Oregon we had hearings on this exact issue a number of years ago. Agencies within the United States Department of Agriculture work and contract with state wildlife agencies using M44 devices to control predators suspected of preying on livestock and federally listed endangered or threatened species. Yet USDA has not been invited to testify and provide a response to Dr. Mark Manfield's testimony. I'd like to submit for the record a letter from the Congressional Sportsman Foundation in opposition to this bill. We look forward to learning more about the bill, particularly from states who are impacted by the legislation's blanket ban on these devices on federal land. H.R. 7918 by Mr. Keating of Massachusetts would establish a federal grant program to provide funding for the recovery, care, and treatment of stranded sea turtles in the United States. This bill would authorize $5 million annually for the next 5 fiscal years for a regionally based grant program operated by the Secretary of Commerce. H.R. 7975 by Mr. Walberg of Michigan would create the Great Lakes Semi-Postal Stamp Act, which would direct the U.S. Postal Service to issue a Great Lakes Restoration Semi-Postal Stamp, the proceeds from which would be transferred to the EPA for the operations supported by the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. The bill is not a silver bullet, but it is a creative way to raise private funding voluntarily to carry out recovery efforts in the Great Lakes. I would like to welcome Mr. Joseph Robinson from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources to the subcommittee and look forward to hearing his perspective on how this legislation could help with restoration efforts. I also would ask unanimous consent to offer Mr. Walberg's statement for the record on this bill.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I look forward to hearing more from our panels of witnesses today and yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Benz. And you know, when my ranking member criticizes the administration for not being here or offering testimony, you might think that it's my job as chair to push back. The problem is he's right. They should be here. They should be testifying. And in this case, we're not even getting testimony until after the hearing. That's not okay. We got to do better. So thank you for pointing that out. Before we hear from our expert witnesses, I would like to submit statements for the record from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and Bureau of Reclamation. We invited them to testify, and in lieu of in-person testimony, they have provided statements, although I'm told we don't have those statements yet. So when we get them, we'll submit them for the record. We got to do better. Members with questions can submit questions for the record to these invited and absent agencies. Additionally, I'd like to submit statements for the record from Representative DeFazio on his bill, H.R. 4951, Representative Keating on his bill, H.R. 7918, and Representative Porter on her bill, H.R. 8090. We'll now transition to our expert panel. I would like to remind the witnesses to mute yourself, please, when you're not speaking to avoid inadvertent background noise, and I will allow all the witnesses to testify before we bring it back to the members for questions. We'll first hear from Dr. Charles Innis, Director of Animal Health at New England Aquarium. Chair now recognizes Dr. Innis for 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and Subcommittee members for inviting me to testify at this hearing. I'm a veterinarian and Director of Animal Health at New England Aquarium in Boston. I've been in practice for 28 years. The majority of that time has been spent caring for aquatic animals, including thousands of stranded sea turtles. I'm here today on behalf of the New England Aquarium and the Sea Turtle Stranding and Salvage Network in support of the Sea Turtle Rescue Assistance Act. The 6 sea turtle species that are found in the U.S. waters are protected under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. Therefore, federal agencies are responsible for conserving these species. Recovery plans for sea turtles have been produced by the National Marine Fisheries Service, and all of the plans recommend the establishment and maintenance of programs to manage stranded sea turtles. This bill will provide funding to support these programs. Human population growth, bycatch in fisheries, coastal development, ocean industrialization, and climate change threaten sea turtle populations. Cumulatively, the many risks that sea turtles face result in the injury, illness, or death of thousands of sea turtles per year in the U.S. Well-known recent examples of sea turtle stranding incidents include the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, cold stunning events in New England, Texas, and the Carolinas, and red tide events in Florida. Beyond these large-scale incidents, individual sea turtles are found stranded daily in the U.S. due to injury and illness. In order to advance the recovery of endangered sea turtles, NMFS established the Sea Turtle Stranding and Salvage Network. Although NMFS coordinates the network, permitted local organizations conduct the majority of network operations, responding to stranded turtles, collecting scientific data, transporting sick and injured turtles to rehabilitation facilities, providing veterinary care, and educating the public about sea turtle conservation. There are no alternative plans and no sustainable funding sources to provide care for the thousands of sea turtles that strand in the U.S. each year. Currently, there are 58 facilities in 21 U.S. states and territories that are federally permitted to rehabilitate sea turtles. All of these facilities largely rely on their own operating budget and donations for the majority of expenses. Many of our facilities are overly reliant on volunteer labor. As the number of strandings increases, this is becoming an untenable situation. My work and the work of my colleagues has demonstrated that injured and ill sea turtles suffer from a variety of serious physical and physiologic problems. Turtles often require veterinary care for weeks to months before they can be returned to the wild, and our success rate is high. But this work is expensive. A recent informal survey of 8 institutions on the East Coast of the U.S. conducted by National Aquarium and South Carolina Aquarium found collective spending of $5 million per year and a median annual cost of $430,000 per institution for sea turtle stranding and response. Sea turtles are not currently given a full suite of federal support, such as the support that's given to marine mammals by the Marine Mammal Protection Act and the Prescott Grant Program. NMFS has awarded more than $67 million over the last 20 years to marine mammal stranding partners, yet there's no analogous funding source to provide care for federally protected sea turtles. Just as Congress has recognized its responsibility to support protected marine mammals, so too Congress should support programs that care for our protected sea turtle species. Given the growing number of strandings, funding is needed to increase spatial capacity, staffing, infrastructure at our facilities, and to cover the costs of veterinary care and transportation. This bill would sustain and enhance these ongoing efforts for our U.S. sea turtle stranding networks. Funding is also needed for research to better understand the post-release survival of rehabilitated sea turtles in order to evaluate the impact of our efforts. We must use emerging technology to gain long-term outcome data for sea turtles that are released from our programs. This bill would accelerate and expand this much-needed work because it creates competitive grant funding for such research. In conclusion, this bill will improve our ability to provide care for stranded sea turtles in the U.S., and it will improve our ability to understand the value and long-term outcome of our efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Innis. We will next hear from Dr. Mark Mansfield, family physician and the father of Canyon, for whom one of these bills is named. The chair recognizes Dr. Mansfield for 5 minutes. Dr. Mansfield, I think you may be muted. We can see you, but can't hear you. So I'm going to ask staff to see if they can work with Dr. Mansfield to get the audio going. And in the meantime, we'll skip ahead in the batting order and go to Mr. Adel. I'm going to pronounce this right, I think. Adel Hawk. I'm not going to be able to do it. Dr. Adel Hagalhakalil. And I'm going to invite him to correct my mutilation of his name. I apologize for that. General Manager of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, which is a really important water manager in California, so we all better learn to pronounce his name correctly. But welcome, sir. You're recognized for 5 minutes. And you two are muted. It could be we're having a system audio problem here. You want to try to say something again, see if we can hear you? No. Darn it. Hey, something, see if we can hear you. There we go.
Hear the witnesses fine.
All right. We got it now in the hearing room. I think something has been fixed. So let's do this. Let's go back to Dr. Mansfield. And sir, if you wouldn't mind going ahead with your testimony, we'll pick up where we left off with you. Sorry.
No worries. Chairman Huffman, Ranking Member Benson, members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to testify and support Canyons Law, H.R. 4951, a bill to ban the use of deadly M44 cyanide bombs on our public lands. I'm a family physician, and more importantly, I'm a father. For the past 5 years, I've advocated for an end to the use of a deadly wildlife poison device, the M44 cyanide ejector, that killed our family dog and nearly took my son's life. On March 16, 2017, my son Canyon was spending time right out here in Idaho on this mountain in the outdoors with his beloved hunting dog, Casey, a yellow lab. This is a place where he went to study, to play, to pray. Canyon noticed an unusual looking device protruding from the ground that had never been there before. But being a curious boy, he noticed the sticky lure, and as he touched the cyanide bomb, it went off in his face. Thanks be to God that the wind was at his back and his arm was across his face, and Canyon quickly washed his face with spring snow. But as he looked up to see Casey wasn't in the front heel position he was so trained to stay in. Casey had taken the brunt of the cyanide as the wind blew straight into Casey's face. Canyon watched Casey seize while bloody foam came from his mouth and his eyes became opaque, and Casey died right before Canyon's eyes. In a single moment, our lives were changed forever. The M44 cyanide bomb set by the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Wildlife Services Program stole a cherished member of my family, an irreplaceable piece of my son's innocence and my entire community's sense of security. To Wildlife Services, Animal Damage Control as they're known, our beloved dog was just a non-target take, and our heartbreak merely a public relations problem. Rather than evaluating how to make communities safer so that other families would not have to suffer a painful aftermath of an M44 encounter, the agency quickly began a messaging campaign to derail policymakers, public health advocates, and others who called for the removal of these deadly devices from our communities and our shared public lands. They made and continue to make unsupported claims about the need for every tool in the toolbox to remain available and supposedly the targeted nature of M44s. I assert that public lands managers do not need any so-called tool that can indiscriminately poison children, kill pets, and devastate families, nor do they need a tool that does not know its target. Our dog Casey's death remains a painful memory for my family, and the heartbreak and trauma of witnessing his death forever remains with my son Canyon. But we are fortunate that he survived the exposure to the dangerous poison released from the cyanide bomb. As a physician and as a parent, I believe it's important that this subcommittee understand the profound long-term impacts of cyanide exposure on my son's well-being. Canyon experienced excruciating headaches all day and through the nights without relief for 5 weeks, with nausea, vomiting, and numbness in his hands, and a crushing insomnia. For years, he experienced new onset severe weekly migraines. For a sublethal dose of sodium cyanide, there is no effective treatment for irreversible physical effects of cyanide poisoning, much less the accompanying emotional and psychological trauma. Yet another reason to protect the public from cyanide bombs. Wildlife Services has been afforded countless opportunities to rein in its own deadly practices, yet the public has not made safer at all. The agency has repeatedly updated M44 use guidance and restrictions, adding new, ineffective guidelines on top of existing requirements that were already subject to widespread non-compliance. It is clear that legislative intervention is necessary. Indeed, we must ask ourselves, how many families must be harmed before Congress can act to make meaningful change? What collateral damage will we accept when it comes to efforts to kill so-called nuisance animals? Have we simply conceded that hikers, hunters, and outdoor recreationalists should fear for their safety while trying to enjoy our public lands? How many pets must be killed? How many children poisoned? And how many families traumatized before meaningful federal action is taken? I am powerless to change what happened to my son, but Congress can ensure that it does not happen to others. Is it going to take the death of a child to ban this antiquated, indiscriminate device? I respectfully urge the subcommittee to advance Canyon's law this session for the sake of people, pets, and wildlife across the U.S. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. And we're going to now hear from Mr. Adel Haji Khalil. In the intervening time, I was able to actually read the letters on this page more carefully, and it's not that hard. It's Haji Khalil. We can all say it. Mr. Haji Khalil, welcome. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Chair Hoffman, Ranking Member Benz, Representative Napolitano, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before your committee today. It's my pleasure as the General Manager of Metropolitan Water District of Southern California to provide metropolitan support for H.R. 1890, extending the authorization for Reclamation's Basin Study Program for 10 years. I have submitted written testimony for your consideration and share some of my thoughts with you today this morning. Basin-wide or region-wide studies are important for future planning scenarios when they are based on the best science and information available and can help agencies like Metropolitan project future regional needs and investments. As Ben Franklin said, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. And we should be planning for the future, and this is important for all of us. One of the key components of Reclamation's Basin Study Program is that it allows Reclamation to bring together technical experts, state and local water managers, conservation groups, and other stakeholders to comprehensively assess water supply and demand imbalances at the river basin level, as well as identify the disparities among the water users. This work is now more important than ever as we face changing climate and the worst drought in our history. Over the past 25 years, Metropolitan, with the collaboration of our 26 member agencies and outside experts, have developed its own long-range plan called the Integrated Water Resource Plan, the IRP. The IRP provides us a collaborative planning approach to regional water management for the entire Southern California region, which provides drinking water to 19 million people. While the IRP forecasts water supply conditions for 50-year planning horizon, we update that every 5 years using best available science and most recent hydrological information. Reclamation's planning work is essential to this effort and our forecast for the future. Our staff was invited to participate in the development of the Reclamation's 2012 Basin Study. The study confirmed that Colorado River was over-allocated and expanded our understanding of the Colorado River system's current risks. It was an important reminder to Metropolitan and the basin states that we are interdependent on each other, and we have to work together. It also provides us a unique opportunity for each of the 7 basin states to work together and learn from one another about what each state's own individual water portfolio and water planning scenarios entailed. It marked a turning point as the study was the first time Reclamation considered the potential impacts of climate change on a basin-wide scale and highlighted the risks a dry future could impose on all of us. Unprecedented times call for unprecedented measures. In response to the severe dry conditions, California's Department of Water Resources in California limited the delivery of water supply from Northern California to just 5% of our contracted amount. In response to this drastic cutback, Metropolitan declared a water shortage emergency and began actively working on urgent system improvements and conservation initiatives to preserve our limited supplies. To reduce our region's system, impact by the future droughts, we are investing in a variety of water projects, including a new large-scale recycled water project that this committee has been so helpful in advancing. We are working hard to ensure our region has enough water to get through 2022 and beyond. Metropolitan is dedicated to continuing to work with the federal government, the 7 basin states, Mexico and Colorado River Basin tribal nations, and other stakeholders to stabilize conditions and halt the rapid decline of Lake Mead and Lake Powell. The basin studies ensures that we are all operating from the same science and are aware of the risk we are facing. Federal investments like the funding for water shortage, included in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, help provide communities with resiliency in the face of changing climate. Thanks to Congress's foresight in enacting the Secure Water Act in 2009 and Reclamation's work in convening stakeholders and issuing these basin-wide reports, we have an agreed-to baseline of information about climate change. But we need to continue investing and looking at science and data and updating the changing conditions every day that we're facing. We need that information from Reclamation to help all of us plan for the future to ensure we have resilient water future for everyone. Metropolitan encourages Congress to support this urgent and helpful bill. We urge you to reauthorize and extend this essential program. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Haji Khalil. Finally, we'll hear from Mr. Joseph Robeson, Southern Regional Supervisor of the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. Mr. Robeson, you're welcome. You're recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the subcommittee. I want to thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony on HR 7975, the Great Lakes Restoration Semi-Postal Stamp Act. My name is Joe Robinson, and I'm the Southeastern Regional Supervisor for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources Wildlife Division. In this role, I supervise 17 counties in Southeast Michigan, oversee and help manage over 2,000 acres of state land in this region to benefit wildlife, habitat, and people. I'm here to testify in support of HR 7975, which directs the United States Postal Service to issue a Great Lakes themed semi-postal stamp for the citizens to voluntarily purchase to generate additional funds for the highly successful and widely popular Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. As a lifetime hunter and angler who has dedicated my life to conserving the region's natural resources, I have seen firsthand the significance of the investments made by the GLRI since its inception in 2010. And while the U.S. Congress has shown strong support year after year for this program by appropriating dollars at a robust level, creating an additional funding mechanism to supplement the annual appropriations process with the creation of this specialty stamp will not only increase dollars for on-the-ground conservation, but also serve as a method to promote GLRI to the broader public who directly benefit from the program's existence. To date, the GLRI has funded over 6,000 restoration projects throughout the region, resulting in more than 460,000 acres of wildlife habitat enhancements and over 2.2 million acres of farmland receiving technical and financial assistance to implement on-farm best management practices that improve water quality and soil health. There have been many projects in my region of the state where we have used GLRI funding along with state and private sector dollars to enhance, restore, and conserve 1,000 acres of coastal wetlands and prairie grass that benefit all wildlife, fish, citizens of Michigan, and all the visitors that visit this great state. The GLRI has also enhanced Michigan's ability to confront major environmental problems threatening the Great Lakes, from accelerating progress in addressing our state's 14 areas of concern to significant initiative to eradicate aquatic invasive species and water bodies throughout our state, and to allow extensive work to reduce non-point source pollution through green infrastructure project. Thanks in large part to contributions from GLRI, Michigan, and the US EPA agency, we have completed restoration efforts at and delisted several of our AOCs since its inception. The Deer Lake and White Lake AOCs in 2014, the Menominee River AOC in 2020, and the same goes for the important fisheries work. GLRI has enabled projects like the protection of the Buffalo Reef in Lake Superior, installation of the new spawning reefs in Saginaw Bay, St. Clair, and Detroit River, and work to prevent invasive carp and other species from entering the Great Lakes. These investments serve current generations of Americans, but also help secure a healthy future for those who inherit these lands and waters from us in years to come. I think a lot about future generations and have invested a large part of my life mentoring kids in our time-honored outdoor traditions of hunting and fishing and teaching them about the importance of natural resources conservation and management. As today's decision makers and natural resource stewards, we have a tremendous responsibility to set policy in line with our values that our region's treasured natural resources continue to produce a bountiful harvest and the full range of ecosystem services upon which we all rely on. The GLRI is a regional conservation model to which all other programs are compared to. It is truly the nation's interest not only to maintain but grow us from the important on-the-ground, result-oriented work and continue at an even larger scale. The way that the GLRI funds are leveraged with state and private sector dollars further amplifies the impacts and serves as an exemplary model for how conservation work is done in the United States. In closing, I would like to thank the committee once again for the opportunity to offer up my perspective, and to Congressman Walberg and the 32 bipartisan co-sponsors who have brought the legislation forward. In my view, there are a few other issues of greater importance than the conservation of natural resources. I encourage you all to support and advance this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roberson, and thanks to the entire panel. I want to remind members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions, and the chair will now recognize members for the questions they may have for these witnesses. Let me just first clarify that by criticizing the administration, in fairness, the Department of Interior did submit statements. They're not here to testify, and they should be, but they did submit written statements. It was NOAA that left us completely empty-handed, so I just want the record to be clear on that. I'll now recognize myself for the first round of questions. And I'd like to begin with you, Dr. Innis. You made the case for why sea turtle rescue operations deserve and need the same kind of support that we have provided for the folks who are out there working hard to rescue marine mammals. I've got an organization like that in my district. The Marine Mammals Center in Sausalito works up and down the West Coast and in Hawaii and does amazing, heroic work. Can you elaborate a little more on why we need something analogous to that for sea turtle rescue operations?
Sure, thank you. The Sea Turtle Stranding Network is not completely enmeshed with the marine mammal rescue community. There are some centers that do marine mammals and not turtles. There's some that do turtles and not marine mammals. So the funding that is provided through the Prescott Grant Program for marine mammal stranding work does not at all provide funding support for sea turtle work. Our facilities, as I said, rely on our own operating budgets generally, volunteer labor, donations, grants from private organizations. And for some facilities that are large and well-funded, that's okay. Other facilities that are important in our stranding network are small nonprofit organizations, small staff. Many of them are run largely by the vision and motivation of 2 or 3 people. So there's a problem with the long-term maintenance of those facilities without additional funding. Some of our facilities, because we're so reliant on our own operating budget and revenue streams, we're just unable to provide care for stranded sea turtles during the pandemic, with revenue going to essentially zero for some of our places. So overall, I think the funding is needed to make the situation more stable and provide some funding so that the research that's needed, the priorities that we think we need to pursue for the future can really be pursued in an organized way.
I appreciate it. I want to move on, if I could, to Dr. Mansfield. Thanks for your testimony. What an amazing and shocking story. Thanks for bringing it to us in such detail. Were you ever notified that Wildlife Services would be placing an M44 device near your property?
No, sir. In fact, when the emergency responders, the sheriffs arrived first and went up the hill. They had no idea what these devices were. Hazmat showed up and they had no idea what they were. And it was some freaky situation where an ex-wildlife services trapper who is now a sheriff texted one of the sheriffs or called him or something and said, this is a cyanide bomb, an M44 he called it then. And it was identified as cyanide and we were sent to the emergency room. While my son was getting IV and tests, and the ER doctor, who has been a very experienced ER doctor for decades, had no idea that these were around. They were not notified. Nobody was notified. In fact, the ER doctor and I were real time looking up what to do with cyanide exposure because we had no idea what to do. And here's my kid who has got cyanide all over him and us as well. And the hospital had not been notified. No one in the region knew. And ultimately, it doesn't really matter because if you were notified, it doesn't change anything. If you don't have the antidote right with you, you're dead.
Yeah.
And there's not much you can do for a sublethal dose.
So you're a medical doctor. If they had bothered to tell you they were putting this device near your property, would you have let them do it so close to where your family spends time outdoors? And what precautions would you have taken to protect your family if you knew it was there?
I think if anyone knows that there's cyanide on public lands or private lands or whatever, they're not going to go near it. But really, that issue isn't really an issue because, you know, you can see behind me, this is my backyard, and there are no fences between the BLM and the private land. And, you know, from east to west, if you put cyanide bombs out on the lands, most people aren't going to notice. Most people don't read signs. Most people don't look at certain gates. You come in another gate. It's just absolutely too risky to have these M44 cyanide bombs placed out in our public lands.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. It's just outrageous that they do this and then that they would defend it and care more about PR in the aftermath of a terrible incident like that than rethinking a wrong-headed policy. So thanks for bringing this to us. We're going to do our best to act on it. With that, I will yield and recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my first question is going to be regarding sea turtles, so let's go back to the veterinarian for a moment. Dr. Innis, first of all, the sea turtles live a long time. What's the normal age of a sea turtle?
Easily human lifespan. We've not really been monitoring them in the 1800s to know if we have any now that are 150 years old, but we do have many in captivity that we know are decades old. New England Aquarium, we have one that's approaching 70, 80, 90 years old now.
Moving on. There's been some suggested by the chair that we should analogize the U.S. Senate, but we don't want to do that. The question would be, over that period of time for the females, how many times do they come ashore to lay eggs?
Historically, when females had very few threats, once they reached adult size after 20 to 30 years, they would have a decades-long reproductive lifespan. Most sea turtle females lay eggs every few years, and when they do that, they lay multiple clutches per year. So over the course of a female's lifetime, they lay tens of thousands of eggs, but the majority of those eggs are eaten or do not hatch. The babies that do hatch, many of them are eaten. And so really females need a decades-long reproductive lifespan in order to ensure that they produce 1 or 2 babies that will actually survive to replace them as adults later.
I was glancing through your testimony and I was trying to find out which areas you were focusing upon. Where will this money be spent? Which is it? Hawaii? Is it the West Coast, the East Coast?
Well, it's competitively available to all of the stranding organizations. So those 58 organizations throughout the U.S. and territories could apply for it. It would be up to NIMFs and U.S. Fish and Wildlife to prioritize where those funds go. But presumably they would be put into areas that are considered high volume stranding areas such as Texas, Florida, the Gulf Coast, Hawaii, New England, the Carolinas, really everywhere where sea turtles are stranding in large numbers now.
Right, and I noticed, I was, again, looking through your testimony and trying to figure out exactly how much damage has been done by virtue of the problems they encounter, the turtles encounter on shore, to the overall population of turtles. I can't remember if you testified to that, but do we have any idea of
Yeah, it depends on
reductions?
what we include as being included in that annually can vary depending on your definitions, but we believe that there's 4,000 to 5,000 sea turtles per year that are stranding from common causes. Aside from these mass events like oil spills and cold stone events that happen sporadically, there's still 4,000 or 5,000 in the background every year that are stranding in U.S. territories.
And so, one last question, and that is, it's one thing for us to focus on, as we should, the shores of the United States. What's going on elsewhere worldwide in the, you know,
Sure.
30 seconds.
Similar a lot of the species that are found here are found in other parts of the world. They are listed internationally by organizations like the IUCN as endangered, critically endangered globally. So the problems that they're encountering here exist everywhere else in the world where humans are having impacts on them.
Thank you. Shifting to Mr. Robison, to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Mr. Robison, I was interested, or I am interested in knowing the type of follow-up after the funds generated, we hope, by this postal stamp, the follow-up on the actual investment of the money. Can you share with us how the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is held accountable for its investment of these funds?
Yeah, once we receive a grant, I've been lucky enough and successful in receiving quite a few grants for GLRI funding and doing wetland restoration and grassland restorations. And the way we have to monitor it, we have to do exactly what we wrote in the grant. It's a competitive grant, and you apply through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or EPA to get that grant. So basically, what you're doing is you have to show them where you spent the funds. You have to show them that the project was completed. You have to do the monitoring for 10 years, making sure that the wetlands, the exactly type of wetland that you said it was going to be. And the same thing with your grasslands or any of the projects that you put forth. You have to document what you're doing, what you've done, and show goodwill that you did exactly what you said in the application of the grant. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. And what about invasive species? Have you focused some of these grants on that area?
Yes, unfortunately, here in the Great Lakes, we have a tremendous amount of invasive species coming in from all the ships, that come in from wherever they come from. But Phragmites and purple loosestrife and flowering rush are some of our target species that we've been targeting throughout the Great Lakes region. It's a tremendous opportunity to take a look at all those invasive species. It's overwhelming because we have made a great stride in reducing a lot of invasive species, but there's a lot more work to do. That's why I believe the Semi-Postal stamp is another important tool in our toolbox to allow additional funds to come in and combat those invasive species.
Thank you so much. Yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Benz. And, I was prepared to compare senators to these turtles based on how old they are, but then Dr. Innis started explaining how highly productive these sea turtles are, and you're right, there's just no comparison at all. So let me recognize Representative Brownlee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm laughing at your response here, but thanks to the panelists for being here, and I appreciate it. Mr. Hagukele, hopefully I'm getting close to pronouncing your name correctly. Thank you for being here, and I live in the Thousand Oaks area, so Las Virgenes Water District is my water supplier. We are, as you know, going through very restrictive, strict conservation measures, certainly more than I've ever experienced. And Las Virgenes Water District says we're still not doing enough, that we need to actually do more. So I guess my first question to you is, I don't think I need you to confirm that we're sort of in dire straits here with regards to water supply. But, and I really appreciate you being here to support Congresswoman Porter's legislation. My question to you really is, what else do you need from Congress, to help us through this? Because you're talking about conservation measures. I think what I heard in your testimony was to make sure that we have the right water supply for 2022 and beyond. And beyond after 2022, I'm concerned, and I'm sure you are, what that picture is going to look like. So is there anything else Congress should be doing to support your efforts and to support my communities that I represent in terms of their water supply?
And thank you very much for the question. Really, it's the first thing that is to link it to this, what we're testifying before today. We need the data, the information, the analysis to really make us react. If we don't know what we're managing, we can't really move forward. The big thing that we're doing in Metropolitan and under my leadership, I've been in Metropolitan for a year, I come with this holistic integrated solution concept that it's not just conservation. We need to do more. We need local water supply. We need storage. We need addressing and cleaning up our groundwater basins. And we need to all collaborate together to manage this finite sort. The old chapters, the old playbooks for water management that worked for us for the last 100 years is not going to work for us. So we are changing the game plan for us. And I think we're asking everyone to do the same thing. Every drop of water has to be recycled and reused. We need to store water when we have it. We need to work together and collaborate to ensure that we are protecting the groundwater basins we have. So in Metropolitan, we're moving forward with a one water plan. I'm building the largest recycled water plant in the entire country, 150 million gallons a day, enough for close to 1.5 million people, but that's not enough. We need to do more. And the only way, I appreciate the funding in the infrastructure bill, but we need to do more in moving the money quickly, taking the obstacles away, and funding more, because every drop of water that we save in Southern California and manage is critical to the entire Southwest, the entire country of Mexico, for all of us, the tribe, the environment. And what we're saying right now is we all need to work together to bridge this issue that we're dealing with, the dire condition. But we have to move forward, create more local water supply, more storage, and more different thinking. And we can't do it alone. I mean, the ratepayers in Southern California have paid a lot of money to help us conserve, but today we're asking to do bold investments that we need. And I'm so grateful for some of the funding in the Bureau of Reclamation right now. We need to move that fast, and we need to get it out, because time is not on our side. And I know your residents are facing a huge concern with conservation, and we appreciate their work. But we need to move forward, and this will help us. This bill can help us ensure that we're using science to drive us, not just whatever we need to do. This is important for us.
Well, thank you for that, and I hear your message loud and clear. More resources, and getting the resources that we have to you as quickly as possible. And so I would just say, please reach out. There's so many members here in Congress that depend on you for our water supply. So please reach out to us and let us know how we can be helpful in the process, and we will continue to advocate for more resources. And I thank you for that. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Brownlee. We'll now recognize Representative Radewagen for 5 minutes.
Talofa. Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Huffman and Ranking Member Bentz, for holding this hearing, and thank you all for testifying today. Dr. Innis, my question is for you. I love sea turtles. I actually live on the ocean, and there's a lagoon right in front of my house, and the sea turtles are in and out of there all the time because nobody ever bothers them. And in fact, my paddling team is called Laume, which means sea turtle. So sea turtles feature prominently in Samoan culture. Besides funding, what other steps can be taken for sea turtle conservation? And are there any steps the territory of American Samoa can take to help sea turtle conservation?
Thank you. There are steps to take to maintain the health of the habitat that sea turtles live in and to reduce the threats that sea turtles face. Their ocean environment is susceptible to pollution. We have problems in some areas with reduced water quality, red tide blooms being enhanced by fertilizer runoff. We have the plastic pollution problem. We have defunct fishing gear in the water. We have a lot of fishing gear in the water that's active and can cause entanglements. So just looking at the overall health of their habitat is, and trying to keep it healthy is one way to maintain sea turtle populations. We also need healthy nesting beaches for females. We're losing nesting beaches in some cases due to erosion. And sometimes the enhancement methods we use to restore eroded beaches or prevent erosion at beaches actually inhibits the ability of female sea turtles to access those beaches or nest successfully in the substrate. So we do need scientists and engineers to be working together to make sure that the coastline itself remains healthy for sea turtles. We also can just be enhancing the response network locally. We rely a lot in the U.S. on networks of citizen scientists, volunteers that help find these turtles, bring them to rehab centers, and help to release them. And during those release events, it's a great opportunity for members of these organizations to be educating the public that sea turtles are present, that they're biologically important, that they're evolutionarily amazing, and that they need our help. So there's a lot of ways beyond funding that we should be helping sea turtles. But this bill specifically provides funding for sea turtles that are already ill and injured. It's about stranded sea turtles that are already sick. And those turtles in and of themselves also need to be fixed and put back into the ocean, and that work requires funding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Redewagen. The chair now recognizes Mr. Soto for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all are familiar with our home state of Florida's massive coastlines, subtropical climate, and beautiful beaches. We are also home to 5 types of sea turtles, loggerheads, which are the most common and are listed as threatened, and they can often be found in Central Florida beaches in Brevard County. But we have others that are endangered, like the green sea turtles, the leatherback sea turtles, hawksbill sea turtles, and Kemp's Ridley sea turtles. From March through October of our fall and winter months, we see these sea turtles come ashore. They lay eggs, and of course, Florida, we do our best to protect our beaches from erosion. We even tape off a lot of these nests, and also are active even on the nights where the sea turtles come ashore to breed. Under the Endangered Species Act, it's illegal to harm, harass, or kill sea turtles' eggs or hatchlings. So we have a great statutory regime to protect them from folks harassing them or trying to do them harm. But we have to do more to protect these majestic sea creatures. We heard about how long they live, longer than even a U.S. senator, according to the chairman and ranking member. And we have great local partners, too, like SeaWorld, who have been a big help. I've been able to tour their facilities many times, and these sea turtles can get quite large. They're pretty impressive creatures, to say the least. And we've seen when we get more aggressive with the rescue efforts, which Dr. Innis has talked quite a bit about so far, it can make a big difference. In the case of the manatees, just recently, we had a record die-off, a unusual mortality event that saw massive populations die. And then in the next year, because of waivers to allow for feedings to help with shelter that were overseen by Florida Fish and Wildlife, among others, in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, that we saw the manatees protected far more this year, and there's more work to do. We do have pressures like growth and pollution that, as we're improving the Everglades, it's getting better, but there's still a threat with red tide and other things in Florida. Dr. Innis, How do you think that the Sea Turtle Rescue Assistance Act of 2022 would help both Florida and our partners in protecting sea turtles?
Florida has the largest number of sea turtle rehabilitation facilities of any state in the country. Florida veterinarians and staff at these centers, Florida scientists, are among the world leaders in sea turtle biology and sea turtle veterinary management. The centers, though, largely rely on internal funding to do that work. Many of the advances, in sea turtle biology, what we know about how to treat them, how to do surgery on them, how to anesthetize them, the types of diseases they get, retrospective studies of why they're getting injured. All of this comes from the stranding network, including in Florida. Florida has been on the forefront of pointing out the vessel strike problem that we have with sea turtles being injured by boats. The red tide, the treatment of turtles that have been intoxicated by red tide toxin was pioneered in Florida. And so any support that those facilities can receive to continue that work, to expand that work, will really help sea turtles throughout the world. Florida, both at the university and these private organizations, has published, perhaps more than anywhere, about veterinary management and sea turtle stranding causes. So they are really at the forefront of teaching the rest of the world about the sea turtles' threats and how to successfully treat them and restore them back to the ocean.
Thank you, Dr. Innis, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Soto. That concludes our member questions, so let me thank the members for their engagement and... Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Gonzalez-Colon. I was misinformed. We, of course, want to hear from you, so let me recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I promise I won't use the 5 minutes. I just want to show my support for HR 7918. I think it's important. I just heard Amata from American Samoa and my dear friend Darren Soto explaining how important turtles are. And again, they can overlive the life of a senator. I totally agree on that. But I think this bill will help a lot to those turtles that are being endangered and stranded in the United States. So that data collection, that scientific research on such turtles which are in danger will help understand better, how everything is changing, and of course how NOAA and Fish and Wildlife are working in this jurisdiction to help. In the case of Puerto Rico, we do have a lot of those programs. We do have the University of Puerto Rico in Maya West with a lot of programs helping with caricos and helping our fish and wildlife, specifically our sea turtles. We're very proud of them. I think the population needs to understand not to hurt their habitat as well. So in that sense, I support this bill, and there are many factors for sea turtles to become stranded on coast, and that even mean natural disasters like hurricanes and many others. So in that sense, I support this bill, and I yield back. And I want to say thank you to the witnesses for coming to the hearing today.
Thank you, Representative Gonzalez-Colon. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for our witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for those responses. If there's no further business before the committee, seeing none, then without objection, we stand adjourned. Thanks, everyone.